one student, and then how many people are not chiropractic? Not chiropractic. Okay. So we're gonna have fun. I'm gonna get a little nerdy. She did a great job of kind of laying out the story and kind of speaking to the emotions and the passion behind chiropractic. I'm gonna switch it up a little bit and go a little bit more into the science and specifically the neuroscience behind it. You know, in our practice, in our profession, we've had, you know, over 100 years to kind of perfect this thing and try to get it right. And I wanna bring back some of the old terms that our forefathers, so to speak, used within our profession and have another talk about that, because it really is a cool time to be a chiropractor, and it's a really cool time to be a chiropractic student, because the science is finally there supporting what we've been saying for over 100 years. And the neuro terminology that they're using in research, and not even in our profession necessarily. I'll talk a little bit about the research that we're doing at Life University with depression and anxiety and immunity and all that kind of stuff. But in other professions, they're starting to use us as an example of what's going on in physiology and in the human body from a neurophysiological standpoint. So we might throw some $13 words out. I'll try to explain them as best I can as we go through that. But I want to hit on some of our old terms as well and bring those back to the surface, because I think right now, especially with what we're going through in this world, we are needed now more than ever. They're out of options for some things. And what we're starting to see with the research, and what we're starting to see with what we're doing, is that we might be, not only are we the best option, we may be their only option. Or you can give your kids psychedelics for depression. We can go there, because they are doing that, right? We'll get there. Some of my best talks, I brought like 24 slides, which is way too many. Some of my best talks are, we don't make it through any of them, and you guys ask lots of questions, and we have a lot more interaction and kind of pull some things. So they're there as a guide if we need them, but we'll kind of dig into some of this. Some big terms on the board there already though. Specifically this first one, subluxation. What's a subluxation? Who wants to jump in? Told you I'm going to make you guys play along one way or another.
It's a blockage in the system.
I love that. Yeah, that's kind of almost exactly how I say it.
That's my husband.
Great job.
Had some training.
Yeah, so it's a blockage in the system, right? We could get really complex with it if we want to, but this word is starting to be taken out of our profession. Some of you guys may know this. There's a school down south that they don't even say this word. And in fact, when you teach there and you ask what they think about this word, they're like, oh, we don't use the S word here. It's like Voldemort. Like he who must not be named kind of thing, right? They don't even say the word, they're scared of it. Like, we have people in our profession that have delegated it to a historical reference. And at a time when we can finally start proving it with neuroscience and with science, we're trying to throw it out, right? It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I would never throw a baby out with that. But, it's like getting rid of our profession and some of the things that we hold dearly, right? So this definition is the current definition by a group called the Rubicon Group. I love the Rubicon Group and what they're doing, and they put this definition out there, and they put it out there with a disclaimer. And the disclaimer was, we want to start the conversation, because if our profession is going to unify and we're going to kind of come together, this is kind of how we're going to have to do it, right? It's either under these terms or without these terms, and kind of pulling all of this stuff in. So a lot of words, a lot of really cool. I love some of the words because they're $13 words. They're very neuro-specific. They have a lot of neuro guys working on this. I might offer a simpler version of it though, and it's what he said, right? The best one. It's a blockage or an interference in the nervous system.
By the way, if I had gotten that wrong, she never would admit it. I'm her husband.
I know how that goes. My lovely wife is here as well. We actually practice together up in Jack's Beach, and yeah, I know how that goes. Moved away from multiple times. She actually wouldn't let me ask questions at a seminar we were at, because we were at a seminar for a technique that she likes, and they said some nerdy neuro stuff. And I raised my hand, and she literally went like this. So don't embarrass me in front of my friends. I'm not going to. I have a really good question. I think it's going to light it up. So, she let me ask the question eventually, but yeah. So interference in the nervous system. Because when I look at this big wordy one, it leaves so much out. it's so wordy and it's so specific, but it also leaves out a big part of what we do in chiropractic, right? It leaves out any soft techniques, any light force techniques. It leaves out things like neuro-emotional technique. It leaves out the thoughts and the toxins to a large degree, right? So if we get back to the traumas, thoughts, and toxins, if you go with this definition, it's great, it speaks to neuro, it's very nerdy, but I think it misses a big part of what we do. So in an effort to simplify it, I think this interference in the nervous system is something that we can all kind of camp around, right? No matter what we're doing in our practice, no matter how we practice within, certain guidelines, obviously, I think this speaks to our profession as a whole, right? And the reason that I wanted to get more simple to bring all this back is because of another term here that I think we need to define a little bit more. Remember this guy? BJ's dad. This is Dee Dee, the guy who kind of started it all. This is the term that he used to describe what he was talking about. You guys remember the term tone? What is tone? What does that mean? Anybody remember from school? Or anybody who didn't go to chiro school want to tell me what tone means? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be a chiropractic word. Right? We don't have to use it in chiro terms.
I was gonna say, like, the way I think I understood that like chiropractically, is if you've ever held something that lacks tone.
That's a great way to say it.
Like I remember holding a dead dog.
Yeah.
And
Or
just
sloppy baby.
it was just there's tone in the living, and then there's you feel more tone, more vibration, more living, but to feel a total absence of it is like wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a great way to say it. And I'm gonna kind of go back to your talk last time. If any of you guys were here for Dr. Joe's talk last time, it was awesome. He did above, down, inside out, right? Which is how the body heals. And then, so me being the nerdy guy, like, my chiro story and how I got here, I'll kind of go into little pieces of it. But when I got to school, what I was being told chiropractic was didn't match my story, and it didn't match really the original chiropractic story. But when you did the above, down, inside out, that made sense to me. It's like, well, that seems more like how my body healed. But then I was like, but how do we know? And so me being a nerdy neuro guy, I'm like, well, but how do we know? Like, how do we measure that? And that's where this term came back to my brain. It was like, well, Dee Dee's looking at how we measure tone in the body. And it's interesting because a lot of people, when you ask them what this term is, they describe it the same way you did, Doc. I don't know how to describe it, but I know what it isn't. Floppy baby, I know what muscle tone is, or if you don't have it, like I can talk about that, right? So tone is simply the energy in the system. It's the overall attitude of something. If you look up the Google definition or the Webster definition, right? So it's the overall attitude of the organism. It's the overall attitude of our nervous system, of our body. So if we kind of use that definition and we assign tone to that, it's how much energy is flowing through the nervous system, how much life force do you have in your body? Well, what's awesome is Dee Dee used a term called tone over 120 years ago. Now, if you look at the literature, they're calling it central integrated state. So they made it a fancy $13 sentence or statement, but it's talking about the same thing. Now, medical community and other things, physiologists and all of that, are talking about the central integrated state in the system. And get this, when the central integrated state breaks down, you have less life force or less health in your body, or what we would call dis-ease, right? So that's what I mean by it's an awesome time to be in our profession, because we're finally, like, research is finally coming to the forefront with what we've needed is ammo, and we're trying to throw it out. We're like, no, we don't want you guys to help us. Let's switch gears and call it something else, right? So we have this ammunition, this awesome kind of science starting to come to the forefront. So I just wanted to kind of bring some of those terms back and get a little nerdy with you guys on that. So the term is also very musical. And this kind of really spoke to me too, right? So if you look at what tone is, it's things like amplitude or strength. If you look at frequency, frequency is a big word, right? And especially in neuroscience, it's the knowledge that's passed on, right? If you look at, I don't have wavelength up there, but wavelength is another one. Like the old hippies in the room, like, you're just not on my wavelength, man. That's the language that you speak, right? So the wavelength, the amplitude, the frequency, the texture, or the depth of the experience. So those are all different chiropractic techniques, which is why different chiros do different things and it works differently for different people, which is why you might send somebody to Dr. Hartley because he has a different technique that might match their frequency, their wavelength, their amplitude a little bit better than what you do. But what you do with light hands and beautiful touch with a baby or a blooming belly might be a lot different than my heavy-handed adjustment. You don't want me adjusting a newborn's oxygen. I'm gonna make it move and you'll hear it across the room, but that might not be what's appropriate for someone who's a few months old, right? So we have all of these different amplitudes and depths with different techniques. That's why my wife brings something totally different to the table than I do. She's a lot gentler, more energy medicine kind of stuff, more energy techniques, because we're working with that energy or that tone within the body to improve health and life force as we go, right? So using some of the bigger terminology if we want to. So tone is one of those big things. Does this look familiar? What determines tone? Movement is one of the biggest things, right? Movement drives our brain more than anything. Our bodies were meant to walk how many steps a day? Please don't say 10,000. Everybody always says 10,000, right? Do you know how far your body was meant to walk a day? Anybody want to wager a guess?
3,000?
Steps?
Yeah.
Or miles? 12 miles. Your body was meant to walk 12 miles a day. In order for your brain, your nervous system, your cardiovascular system to get the proper amount of activity or activation, you were meant to move 12 miles a day. Quit your job, start walking, join Forrest Gump, and you just chill around there, right?
I gotta update my noon.
Yeah, right? Yeah, our 10,000 steps isn't even really a good start, right? So 10,000 steps is better than what most people do, but we still need more movement. And that's one of the big things that I think chiropractic gives us, is it gives us movement. Make sure that the movement is appropriate. Make sure we get the biggest bang for our buck. If you've got a bunch of fixated or stuck segments, that's not feeding the brain. When you release that segment, now you've increased the afferent input, you've increased the joint mechanoreceptors, you've increased the amount of movement that's happening in the body with each step. So you maximize the efficiency of the brain and the potential of the brain to get the best out of that, right? So again, we're needed now more than ever, especially as people become more sedentary, right? Sitting is the new smoking, all the fun stuff that we have in our office and on posters. Well, this is why, because that movement doesn't match nearly what our body and our brain needs, right? So we need to increase the frequency, we need to increase the amplitude, we need to increase the depth of our experience too, because that's a big part of it, right? We're coming out of something that's unprecedented in our history. People were isolated in a way that they were never isolated before. When the research comes out about all the social isolation, it should scare the crap out of us. I'll share a few numbers with you guys here if we get time, but we were not meant to be alone. Our brains were not meant to be alone. Depression rates went from 7% to 41%. Suicide rates went from about 3% at the height of the epidemic to almost 30%. Addictions through the roof, spousal abuse through the roof, all of those things that are mental health indicators destroyed. We destroyed those numbers. We rewrote record books on some of those things. And you know what their answer is, right? Because most of the antidepressants and antipsychotics, they're the same drugs that were created in the 40s, from the 40s to the 60s. They haven't really changed all that much. Anybody know what the efficacy of an antidepressant medication is? Percentage-wise? Between 11 and 13%. How effective is exercise? 60. 60 in the research. I would argue if you continue to do it, we're probably closer to 100 now. But at a 6-month study, it's 60% effective versus 11 to 13%. And that's in one trial. They only need one trial to show better than 10% to make it to market. Which is why they really are using psychedelics. Do you know what psilocybin is?
Yeah, mushroom.
Yeah, magic mushrooms, MDMA, Molly, or half of ecstasy, or LSD. They're microdosing it for people. And they're giving them microdoses of this for mental health, for things like schizophrenia, depression, anxiety. But you know what the patients are doing, right? We have a couple brain injury patients that were getting microdosed. They were saving up their doses and just getting really messed up on Saturday. So if you take all of your microdose at once for a week, you have a really good time for a few hours. So they weren't using it for mental health, they were getting one really big escape. I had one of them call me and like, yeah, there's like purple clowns in our bathroom right now, are we all right? How much of the psilocybin did you take today? So they're figuring that out. That's not a good place to be, but that's, I mean, they're kind of out of options. They're using street drugs to treat something that they just don't have a handle on, right? And when we look at the numbers, they're ballooning, they're still going up. So movement, one of the biggest things that drives that tone in the brain, because mental health, it's not necessarily about what happened to us, right? Everybody's had crappy things happen. Why do some people rise above and some people get swallowed up by it? And I think the word tone is something that you're gonna see pop up in the literature a lot more. Not necessarily the word tone. If you guys go back to that first slide, resilience is the word that places like Harvard and Stanford are using right now in their studies on how the brain works, how the babies develop, how the body develops, right? So again, bigger words, maybe resilience, neuro-resilience. They're some of our founding principles with things like tone. So movement, internal environment, external environment, all determine tone. Or traumas, thoughts, toxins. Look familiar, right? Just maybe worded a different way in the literature. When you look at, they're never gonna give us credence. They're never gonna give us our due respect on this. They're gonna change the names. They'll never call it innate, but in the medical literature right now they call it WOB, wisdom of the body. It's this thing, swear to God, it's this thing, they're not really sure what it is, but it seems like the cells have this, inborn ability to figure out how to heal themselves when they're put under trauma. As long as the body has enough energy and enough focus that it can actually drive those cells. So you mean as long as it has enough tone, it can heal itself. I don't know where I might have heard that. The body can heal itself from other things if it has enough energy or power to do so. Right? So again, they won't necessarily give us our due diligence. You gotta know where to look and how to dig. They're using different words. My favorite is they won't use the term cervical curve because chiropractors monopolize that, right? So they call it cervical thoracic angle. And a decrease in cervical thoracic angle has now been tied to just about every comorbidity known to man. So they will say that it's, a decrease in cervical thoracic angle is increase in diabetes, increase in cancer, increase in anxiety, increase in depression. They'll never call it cervical curve because that would be way too easy for us to plug ourselves in there, right? But, so we need to know kind of what these terms mean, how to uncover these, and how to dig a little deeper, right? So if we keep going, ways to measure tone. There's a bunch of them, right? But I think as chiros, we do some of these pretty naturally. Posture. One of my favorite quotes is, posture is the shadow of the brain. Without going too far into the neurology behind this, I don't want to lose you guys and make this a neuro care seminar or anything, but if you're hunched over and flexed, is that a healthy brain and a healthy nervous system? No. We have to inhibit our flexors with a strong brain to be able to stand upright. So we all kind of naturally look at things like high shoulder on the left, high hip on the right, head tilt in one direction. Those are all clues of low tone and low prefrontal cortex activity or overall tone in the system or overall tone in physiology. Right? So we need to just be able to own these things and master them. And I think using some of the old terms, we shouldn't be afraid of those. We shouldn't be wanting to say, oh, that was just ancient history. We need to tie ourselves to those. Because when you look at them and you compare to what the research is coming out in the neurophysiological journals and all of those places, they're on par, they're right there. And that's one of the cool things. You guys have heard of Heidi Havik in our profession? How many of you guys have heard of Stephanie Sullivan? She'll be the next one. She's the researcher at Life University who's literally doing all of this research right now. She's doing, we have a project going with her, because I used to manage the Neuro Center there at Life, and we started a project before I left to come down here that's still going, working on chiropractic care for depression and anxiety. She just got done wrapping up a study on chiropractic care in the immune system. She's done a research project on what areas of the brain the chiropractic adjustment affects. So she's starting to really put together a case because springboarding off of Heidi's work of tying it to the brain, now she's gone another step further and tied it to very specific areas of the brain and the nervous system, and then tying it to specific conditions, because that's what medical literature wants, right? So research is kind of the currency of healthcare right now. We need to be able to have those things, and she's doing a great job of putting those things together. And And we have some great talks on tone, like how do we measure it? How do you know? And looking at vitals, looking at things like heart rate variability, oxygen saturation, posture, affect. And you guys probably do this already in your patients. If you see somebody walk in and they kind of, how are you doing today? You know, Eeyore walks in, right? That's a different tone than Tigger bouncing into the office, right? She's Tigger. I'm kind of Eeyore-ish when I walk in the office, depending on what time we start in the morning. But if, you know, that high energy, that high activity level when you bounce into the office, that's better tone. You look at their face, if they have a smile on their face and they make eye contact with you, you know the tone is more appropriate in them. But if they don't make eye contact with you, they kind of slunch over, they kind of won't look at you, that's low tone. That's interference in the nervous system. And how many of you guys know Chuck Wrigley, Dr. Wrigley? He and I have had some great conversations about the subluxation above atlas. And that's what he kind of talks about as the thoughts part of it, the autosuggestion, the negative thoughts that are playing in your head, the depressive loops, those types of things, right? So that all shows up in affect. It shows up really in the eyes. Like if you want to really nerd out, we could spend a whole 2 or 3 weeks just going over the nervous system's contribution to the eyes and how they move and how they see, right? So you see it in people's eyes. When you see that sparkle kind of lost in their eyes, that's one thing that we all pick up on, right? That's tone, that's energy, that's how much reserve they have in their system. And ultimately then how much resilience they have, right? How are we doing so far? Are we doing okay with this? Okay. So, what does that look like in a patient? How many of you guys have dysautonomia walking in your office right now? We kind of have a rule in our office. If she's between 13 and 40, she has dysautonomia until proven otherwise. I just see way too much of females walking in, high heart rate, kind of stressed out, not dealing with things well, high heart rate, high blood pressure. What's normal blood pressure for a female in their 30s? We'll say 115, 120 pounds. What's normal blood pressure?
110/70.
I'm glad you said 110/70 because most people would say 120/80, right? That's what we learned in school. If a female comes in at 120/80, that's hypertensive. She should be about 110/70 or lower because blood pressure is a measure of peripheral resistance. And I'm not making any generalities or anything here. I know some girls that can beat me up, but in general, males have more muscle tone than females due to testosterone versus estrogen. We come with more peripheral resistance. So we should have higher blood pressure. Problem is all your medical norms were measured on a bunch of 40-year-old white dudes. That's where our normative values come from. They haven't taken into account different genders, and they don't take into account different races very well with some of those normative values. So we need to be better in looking at physiology. So we see a lot of autonomic dysregulation. We see poor posture. In our office, we deal a lot with depression and anxiety, so we see a lot of flat affect and just that poor kind of mood in general. One of the cool things, I'll camp here for just a second. One of the cool things that got the depression study started at Life was we work with a lot of concussion athletes. And one of the hallmarks of concussion, the reason we pay attention to it, it's not the headaches or neck pain or dizziness. It was actually the fact that a guy named Junior Seau decided to take his own life, right? And when Junior Seau, who was a Hall of Fame linebacker for the San Diego Chargers, when he took his own life, he did it in a really specific way. I don't mean to be too graphic, but he shot himself in the chest. And when he did it, he left a note. In this guy's darkest hour, in his note, and his daughter read the note at his Hall of Fame induction ceremony. There wasn't a dry eye in the place, right? In his darkest hour, he wrote down, I know football did something to my brain. I just can't take it anymore. I can't be on this earth. I'm hurting my family. I'm hurting my loved ones. But I'm doing it this way so that you can take my brain to Boston and find out and help them. So he literally shot himself, and I'm paraphrasing. I don't have his thing memorized, but in his darkest hour, he decided to do it that way so that other people could learn to help his friends, right? So mental health was a big hallmark of the concussion thing. So what we found was we were getting all of these concussed athletes coming in, guys like Sid Crosby and you know, NFL guys, NHL guys, and what we were noticing was they couldn't do a one-legged stand, and they were also scoring really poorly on the depression, anxiety, and stress symptom scores. So we already knew the mental health piece, so we were giving them that as an input. And what was really cool is we weren't doing any talk therapy, we weren't doing anything like that with them, but what we noticed was when they could do a one-legged stand again, their depression, anxiety, and stress symptom scores got up to 70% better. So we started this research project because we know through Heidi's work and through what Stephanie's doing that the first thing the chiropractic adjustment affects is the cerebellum. You guys remember that little piece of the brain in the back that we learned does a one-legged stand and touches your nose? Well, in 2018, we finally learned that we only had 20% of that right. The output of the cerebellum is only 20% for movement and balance of your physical body. The other 80% is it balances and coordinates your thoughts, your emotions, your immune function, your gut function. It literally balances and coordinates everything, which is why chiropractic helps everything. Because when we send that huge afferent barrage or sensory signal in through the adjustment, it sends a huge burst of energy, tone, activation, central integrated state into the cerebellum, which helps to reorganize everything, balance and coordinate all those systems. And the best part is, the next stop is the prefrontal cortex. A strong cerebellum movement drives the front part of your brain. And the reason that's important, that's the part of your brain that makes up your personality. It's what allows you to see the big picture, realize everything's gonna be okay, be social, connect to others. So we have, you can't put that in a pill. You can't put that in a bottle, right? So again, we started this with why they need us more now than they ever have, and we might be the only option they have. We know that running and exercising is huge and hugely great for depression and anxiety, but how do you get Eeyore off the couch to go around 5K? Us. Because we know we send that afferent barrage, we wake those parts of the brain and the nervous system up to get them going, to get their motivation back online, to get up and go, their give a damn, excuse my language, turn back on, right? So we have to drive that tone, we have to drive that energy, and we have to own some of these terms as we get through this, right? So we see that flat affect, that anxiety, depression. Again, I'm not gonna read these slides to you, and you guys know this, if you turned on the news or listen to anybody, you know that numbers are through the roof, right? Depression, anxiety. What's the #2 killer of teenagers right now? Suicide is. That should scare the crap out of them. Kids that shouldn't be the #1 killer of teenagers. But when you've got over 400,000 kids under the age of 1 on antidepressants and anti-anxiolytics in our society, we start messing with neurochemistry early. But hey, at least the kid doesn't have tolerance, right? That's why they're doing it. They're putting kids under the age of 1. There's over 4 million kids under the age of 15 on antidepressants and anti-anxiolytics because they don't know what we know. Or they do, they just won't use the same terms, right? So those numbers should scare us into kind of waking up on some of this stuff. That's why I'm very passionate about this. Anxiety, again, most people don't really discern between anxiety and depression very well. Most people, when you question them, 50% of people that have anxiety also have depression because they don't really know what it is. They might get anxious and then they feel sad about it. They might feel sad so they get anxious if they can't do what they want, right? It's kind of back and forth because it's not necessarily that what happened to me thing. We're getting past that. Mental health is still now to some degree is very taboo. It used to be very taboo to talk about. But now you've got people like Michael Phelps at least talking about it on TV. You've got some athletes that have come out and starting to talk about this, so it's a little less. But people still look at it as a sign of weakness. And it's not weakness, it's low tone. And it's something that can be helped through movement, through adjustments, through increasing the activation of the nervous system. But you're seeing that change, right? You're seeing a change in neuropsychology from what happened to me to where's the tone of my brain, where's the tone of my physiology. Which is great to see because the only answer for that is us or movement or something like that because you can't do movement with a pill. I mean, you can, I guess you could take a bunch of speed, but not the right kind of movement, right?
And they're already on that too, right? All the Adderall.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole other, please, let's not go down that road. I could talk out Adderall for a week. Yeah, so yeah, they're already taking that just to get through their classes. And to get through those things. And then they're taking Ambien to go to sleep. Right? So that, it's basically legal speedballs. So that's basically where we're at with how we're medicating our society right now into function. So we need to do better as a society. And again, just kind of more numbers, it's increasing daily. These are the articles that I was talking about. If you see right here, the psychedelic miracle, how ayahuasca and MDMA are radicalizing treatment for mental illness. Radical is one way to put it. It's also in this one here. But again, the exercise cure, why it may be the best fix for depression. This is where they throw the numbers out that most antidepressants are about 11 to 13% effective. But exercise is 60. And then there's a drug ad. Cool. Effects it. Right? So it's just what people are seeing. It's what they think they need. We've got an 18-year-old right now that she's coming to us for her mental health, but she won't get rid of her mental health drugs because she thinks she needs them. Right? So she knows that she wants to have her brain improved. She knows she's got all this stress and anxiety, and the drug really isn't doing anything because she's still crawling out of her skin. But she still feels like that security blanket because she's bombarded by, this is what's going to fix you, this is what you need, this is what you have to have. So our message has to be stronger than the market, right? More stuff, mental health and pain. I'm not going to get into this too deep, but I don't think the opioid epidemic had anything to do with pain, in my personal opinion. I think it had, well, unless you want to say it was emotional pain. We know now with the research that you feel more pain when you feel sad. Period. When you feel pain, you're losing the ability to inhibit those signals, which is why you have pain. Again, without going too far into the neuroscience of it, your frontal lobe has 4 jobs of inhibition. It inhibits flexors and allows you to stand upright. That's the first thing it does. So it gives us posture. The next thing it does is it inhibits autonomics. So it keeps things like heart rate low, it keeps your stress response down. The third thing it does, and it does it in this order, the third thing it does is it inhibits mood, and then it inhibits pain. And when it breaks down in that order. So you see somebody lose posture first, right? Then you see them have an increase in heart rate, an increase in blood pressure. Then you see them have an increase in acting out or anger or sadness or whatever the inappropriate emotion is. Then pain comes, which is why we tell our patients all the time, pain's gonna be the first thing that goes away when you start adjusting. And we're right, because when you fix it, it works in reversal. So we know how this system breaks down, and we also know now, we've been armed with the science, the brain scans, all of that to prove that when we put a HVLA into the system, it drives the cerebellum and the prefrontal cortex. And knowing the job of that helps us to explain what's going on inside that neurophysiology of a patient, right? So again, I don't think it was ever about pain. I think it was a whole bunch of sad people going to the doctor with some pain and being armed with an opioid, and then getting addicted to that because our addictive personality goes up when you put something like that in the hands of somebody who's sad and depressed. How many of you guys got the special alert from the Florida Department of Health on Friday? The fentanyl overdose,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Back again. I don't know how that drug is still being
They're giving
produced.
fentanyl in childbirth now.
Oh, geez. I told you, they're out of options,
Yeah.
right? They don't know what to do. They literally, their tool bag is different than ours and it's empty. All they have is the other stuff that they're just kind of recycling and trying again. So we have to have better options, because I've worked on a couple of fentanyl cases, fentanyl overdoses. It's the worst brain injury I've ever worked on. They are the hardest ones to get any sign of life out of. I mean, literally, when you're working with a fentanyl kid, them opening their eyes is a win. Them speaking their name or saying mom or dad is a win, because their brain is so far gone when they overdose on that stuff. It's nowhere that we want to be, right? So, bring it back to more happy stuff, a little better. So reserve, just some terms to kind of talk about, and adaptation and resilience. This is one I usually kind of throw out there to kind of get the crowd all stirred up. Is adaptation a good thing or a bad thing? Good? General consensus? It's bad. Adaptation means your brain didn't do its job. Subluxation is an adaptation. Think about that for a second. An adaptation means the environment won, and you had to change something about you in order to stay alive. Adaptation takes years off our life. You adapt because you have poor tone. You adapt because you have poor resilience. The ability to adapt is absolutely good. I'll meet you guys kind of halfway. Having the ability to adapt to a situation is good. But if you have to adapt to your situation, it means you were not able to get back to homeostasis on your own because you had poor resilience. So resilience is the term you're going to see coming out a lot more right now. Harvard is actually doing a resilience study, so is Stanford, especially in kids. You might really love this one too for what we do. They're trying to figure out why some kids do make it and other kids get swallowed up by their environment, right? And they're talking about this resilience word, and it's funny because when you look at the Harvard site, and I think I have it up here on a slide somewhere, and poor resilience to Stephanie's. When you look at the Harvard site right here, Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University, when you look at their stuff, it looks just like ours. It's traumas, thoughts, and toxins. Their traumas is more emotional traumas and what happened to you, but it's toxic environment. It's toxic stressors that they come in contact with. It's bad emotional connections to others, right? So when they're building this resilience term, it's tone. When you read through their stuff, it's exactly what Dee Dee was saying. And they're just catching on. The better tone or the better resilience a kid has because of emotional connections, movement, decreased toxins in their environment, the better chance they have of making it. And we know the adjustment improves tone. We know the adjustment then improves resilience. So why aren't we the pediatricians? If that's how kids make it, if that's how your brain makes it, we have the research now to prove that we make those changes. We call it something different. There's that lexicon difference, right? We're not using central integrated state to tie into resilience yet. But literally our research is starting to mesh that much that even Harvard is recognizing what we're doing. Because they are. When you dig deep into their stuff, they actually they're understanding that a holistic approach to healthcare is more appropriate than a mechanistic one. Which you have to give them a high five and kudos just for that. Breaking the body into parts is not as good as treating the body and the brain as a whole. Right? Because they're working through how to make a more resilient person. How do you increase the tone of something? How do you help the body heal? I don't know. It's so hard to figure out. Remove the interference, right? Don't allow them to have any of those things that are blocking the flow of the energy through the system. So we have the science to kind of look at that, right? And we have Harvard really doing the research for us, which is great, because if we can piggyback off of some of the stuff that they're doing, it'll be easy. So brain reserve, just some other stuff on resilience. There's a ton of research. I won't bore you guys with that stuff. Resilience during COVID-19, breakdown in resilience. Again, the mental health thing, they're starting to say it's more of a tone problem in the brain. It's not, oh, what happened to me, oh, woe is me, all that stuff. With all that crap that have happened to us, right? It's why do some people bounce back? They have more resilience. They have more energy or function in the nervous system, right? So more stress and cognitive function during a pandemic, all kind of things that play into this. Because when we're under stress, if we don't do something, if we don't move, if we don't get out, that's what happens. The brain literally, no, doesn't literally blow up, but it destroys our nervous system. It breaks down our ability to cope and adapt and do all of those things until we can get back to homeostasis. But that's the key. We have to get our body and our brain and our nervous system back to homeostasis. Some things that help with that, I didn't put adjustment up here because I figured we all have that, right? But this is right off of Harvard's study. So the environment, behaviors, physical exercise, sports participation, movement to fight the traumas, social support, spiritual systems, environmental values, optimism, motivation, all of those things that we all kind of preach. It's part of the chiropractic lifestyle. I love how you said in your talk that your mom was kind of an honorary chiropractor. You guys didn't have a chiropractor in your town, but you lived the chiropractic lifestyle. This is the chiropractic lifestyle. They're telling everyone to do what we're telling them to do. Right? So That's what I mean. All of this stuff is very cool, and it's a cool time to kind of be where we're at. Your brain at positive, 31% more productive than your brain at negative. So those negative thoughts really do affect how your brain functions. We can measure that. They've done the studies on it, right? So to kind of wrap up, so reserve is just kind of the energy in your brain. I kind of skipped over that term. It's how much gas you have in the tank, right? It is a measure of your resilience. If you have poor tone, if you have poor autonomic function, if you have poor all of those things, you're gonna struggle. It's about brain economics. If we're stuck in stress, we drive the areas of stress. We don't have enough blood and resources to go to the areas of the brain that make us more human, connect us to others, and do all of those things, unless we're shocked into it. And that shock can be an adjustment, can be exercise, it can be a lot of those things, right? So energy or tone of the brain is kind of where we're at right now. I think it's something getting back to some of our old terms. I love the dyshyphonees. It's a breakdown in physiology. We have a patient right now that kind of drives me nuts. I told her her condition is dyshyphonees. She needs to be called a name, though. Like, she is ordering her own blood work, she's ordering her own MRIs. She doesn't have anything. I mean, she has more tests than anybody I know. They can't find a tumor, they can't find anything. I'm like, you have a breakdown in physiology. Your body's not functioning the way that it should. Your heart rate's 120 sitting here. And she's a 30-something-year-old female who's about 110 pounds. Her heart rate's 110, her blood pressure's 140 over 90. So her autonomics are running wild. But she's convinced she's got cancer or this or that. She needs to be called a name. We've gotten into this world where if I call you a name, you feel better about it. They don't do anything for you. They just called you a name, right? When my story real quick, I was paralyzed when I was in high school. And they called me a name. They called me a spinal stroke. And with that spinal stroke, the doctor told me I'd never walk again. Right? So thankfully he's an idiot. But that's what they do to people. They label them, and then that becomes who they are. How many of you guys have had a patient, they're like, hi, my name is Stacy, I have MS. It's not Stacy, it's Stacy with MS. MS became a part of them. Those complex or those chronic conditions become who they are. And that's why I hate names. That's why I love the dyshyphonees one. It's not up there, but the low tone. Because it's something, it just speaks to your overall physiology. I don't have to call you a name. I can call you all sorts of fancy, neuro names. There's a ton of them out there, right? Guillain-Barré, Lamberti, EDS, whatever you want to say. We can throw names at people all day. They don't do anything for you when they label you, except take your hope away. You start to think, oh, well, I'm MS, and you get on the MS chat board, and forget it. Once they're in the MS Facebook group, it's over. Because now that's who they are. That's everyone on there is what they're going to become, right? Whereas if we talk about it from a physiological aspect, we can improve physiology. We can start people on their healing journey. We can turn the tone up in their brain, and we can turn down the symptoms, right? I'll finish with one kind of story. She's one of my favorites because her and I butted heads like really bad. She was a medical doctor. She ran a ketamine clinic, okay, for pain. So she would have people come in and she would put them on ketamine drips and basically zonk them out so they wouldn't feel pain, right? Well, then she had heat stroke, and as a result of her heat stroke, she had 8 out of 10 pain in her entire body. She did ketamine for like 6 months, did nothing to it. She came to my clinic because one of her friends was like, you just gotta go there, you gotta see what they can do. You've tried the ketamine, you've done what she did. The list of drugs she had tried, I'd never even heard of some of these things. And they were combining them, and they were getting all sorts of crafty. She was writing her own prescriptions, which, yeah, we won't go there, but, so she had done everything. In their world, what do you do for pain? You shut or sedate the brain. In my world, I wanted to turn it up. I'm like, get up, let's go do some movement, let's do some walking, let's do some eye movements. He spoke about the gyrostim. We have a giant spinning chair, right, that spins you through the environment. When you can't move well, we can move you perfectly, exactly how we want to drive certain areas of the brain. We have one here in Jacksonville too. But we can drive you in very specific patterns to drive specific areas of your nervous system. So we got her up, got her going. She's like, no, we can't go, we can't do movement, you need to lay me down and I need to relax. Like literally, she was throwing research articles at me and I was throwing them right back at her and we were fighting. I've never fought with a patient, I fought with her. We were yelling at each other in the back room one day. And then finally on day 3, because we see people a little differently when we do our intensives, we see them for 5 days and we see them 1 hour, 3 times each day. So we see them for 3 hours a day, but we see them very intensely. We adjust them at the beginning of every visit, and then we do some of the neurotherapeutics to kind of work through the system, activate specific areas of the brain, right? We do a lot of eye movements, a lot of weird stuff. But on day 3, she walked in. She's like, I slept last night. She hadn't slept for more than like an hour and a half at a time since all of this stuff started. She's like, I slept last night and my pain is like a 4. It had been an 8. She's like, whatever you tell me to do, I'll do. And she became like my best patient advocate. She got home and she's like telling her other medical docs about this, and we got her pain down to a 2 before she left. And for her, that was unheard of. She didn't think and to be honest, I think she was just looking for it all the time. She would wake up and go, where's my pain? So there was a little pain there. So we worked her through, there's a little workbook by people called Moshkowitz and Golden that I gave her to work through at home. And 4 weeks in, I never heard from her again. She hadn't had any pain, so she stopped calling and saying, but I did this part and it didn't work, and I did this one and it did. She was super type A. She had to let me know everything she was doing, but it was different. It's a different school of thought, right? They want to come at it, they want to shut the signals down. Pain isn't a bad thing. It's a signal in your body to tell you something's not working right, that you need to slow down and pay attention to it. So in their world, they want to shut all that off. In my opinion, and what we do, we want to turn up the energy of the brain. We want to turn up the appropriate areas to do their job and shut things down. And this is the science for them. So thank you guys. I won't keep you any longer here. If you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yes.
First of all, the first speaker was exceptional.
Absolutely. I agree.
But-
You won't be sleeping on the couch.
Exactly. But I found this quite amazing. I mean, I'm just a big believer in chiropractic from a lot of different, I go every week and I've seen the change. I mean, I'm a believer. But I was also, because I'm in the mental health field and working with addiction, and there's been some studies that make you know about some of this stuff where like the atlas is blocked and there's adjustments done and actually clear the blockage, if you will.
Yep.
And people start to really realize, oh, I've got a problem. Do you ever hear about that, or?
Oh, I love that stuff. So Julie Mayer Hunt and Scott Rosa, and I can't think of her name, it's Sherman, the head researcher. It starts with a T, it's a Greek name. She's phenomenal, but they're doing amazing work. So where that blockage comes in with the atlas and the upper cervical technique is, if you guys have you heard of the lymphatic system? I know you guys have heard of the lymphatic system. So how many of you heard of the lymphatic system? The lymphatic system is how our body gets rid of toxins, right? Well, your brain has its own, and it's called the lymphatic system. And you get rid of toxins through cerebrospinal fluid. And that's basically the lymphatic system. And what we're finding is, with Julie's work and Scott's work, and I need to look her up, because she's doing some great work in measuring this stuff. If you have a subluxation of atlas, upper cervical, right, and they're using AO and they're using orthospinology to get rid of the subluxations, they're doing pre and post motion MRIs. And what they're seeing is a blockage in CSF at atlas, and post adjustment they're seeing free flowing of that, which means you can clean house now. You don't have a buildup of the toxins and those things in your brain, because it is a blockage, and it's literally, it's like if you never took the garbage out. It would just keep filling up and filling up and filling up. Well, when atlas is out of position and not allowing that free flow of CSF, you have a buildup of toxins in the brain, right? So, and what they're measuring is they're measuring not only CSF, but they're also measuring through the drainage through jugular, that both of those are affected. So you're not getting bad blood out and you're not getting CSF out through the lymphatic system. So you're just toxifying the brain. It's basically just sitting in its own sludge.
Like the foot on the hose.
Yeah, kind of. Except that doesn't really match, right? So, you know, what's the first chiropractic story? How did chiropractic start with the
Hearing? Deaf.
Yeah, it was Harvey Lillard, right? He got adjusted and his hearing came back. What nerve is it that comes out of the spine and goes anywhere near the ear for hearing? There isn't one, right? It was kind of like me. I walked out of the hospital because physical therapy did what they did. A year later, I still didn't have any hot and cold sensation or pain sensation in my legs from here down. The first time I got adjusted, I went home and I put my foot in the shower and I was like, oh shit, that's too hot. I'm like, wait a minute. So did he move all the bones on all the nerves? He was an old school chiro, so it's possible. He shook me like I know. But it didn't match, right? And Harvey's story didn't match, which is how we kind of got back to tone in central integrated state and increasing the function in the brain. But yeah, so that foot on a hose, that doesn't necessarily for the nerve flow, but for the CSF flow, absolutely. As that atlas kind of keeping all those toxins and that garbage in our brain.
Speaking of the brain, I remember learning like brain congestion, like when you're subluxated, the brain gets stressed out, and that's because I just had a patient like say her vision's getting better.
Yeah,
And I was talking about like congestion in the brain. Is that still like when you're subluxated in the spine, the brain's just overwhelmed, and as you clear that out, the brain starts functioning better? Is that what's happening?
I would say it's underwhelmed. So
Okay.
what happened with Harvey is when you send that huge afferent barrage in, you have an area in your brain called your PTO. It's where your parietal, temporal, occipital confluence comes together. So all of our sensory input meets right here. And that's where something called nausea happens. And nausea is just Greek for knowing. So when you have a subluxation, when you have spinal segments that aren't moving, you don't have a lot of afferent input coming in, or you have a decrease in that. So it lowers the tone or lowers the hum of the brain. But when you improve that, you increase the tone and the hum, so now you can perceive everything better. You have a more complete picture of the world, which means you then have a more appropriate response. It works like a computer, garbage in, garbage out. So that patient that gets up and they're like, wow, did you turn the lights up in here? It's because the hum of their brain is now humming. They're perceiving everything more appropriately and better. So in a sense, it is congestion because everything's kind of cloudy because they don't have a complete picture of the world because they don't have enough energy to really see it with all of their senses. So what you're doing is freeing that energy, freeing that flow up through the spine and through the nervous system to turn the brain up a notch. Take them, and then we can get into early immediate gene response and creating new proteins. They literally start to create different tissues and cells and everything in their brain after adjustment. What Stephanie's research did, sorry, I could nerd out on this stuff all day. She compared chiropractic adjustment to physical therapy. So they had someone deliver an adjustment, and then they had someone do a stretch that felt kind of like an adjustment, right? And they measured the brain pre and post. And immediately after both of them, they did brain scans with the caps where they hook all the electrodes up, EEGs, and they had great activation in the cerebellum, not in the cerebellum, but in the prefrontal cortex. They were the exact same. The PT adjustment and the chiropractic adjustment. And then something happened that they didn't expect. They measured a couple days later and a week later. The PT adjustment had dropped back to baseline and actually a little bit below where it was. The chiropractic adjustment continued to improve, actually reaching maximum effectiveness 1 week later in increasing the function of the prefrontal cortex. One adjustment. Which shows that when you free that motion, when you deliver that HVLA, or you stretch, the brain is active. But when you deliver that interference, when you deliver that blockage, the brain continues to grow and learn and remold from that thing. Neuroplasticity happens with an adjustment that doesn't happen with physical therapy, with stretching, with exercise, right? So we make huge changes that are longer lasting and sometimes not even felt until the patient's at home or on vacation or whatever from what we do. So that's what I mean, like, we could nerd out on the science all day on this stuff from this neurophysiological aspect of kind of where we're at as a profession, and it's really, really cool.